listening to the Labor Notes podcast, a weekly show from Labor Notes on rank and file news and organizing strategies. I'm Danielle Smith, co-host of the pod.
And I'm pod co-host Natasha Elena Yulman. Today, we're getting into a couple of recent and upcoming pieces, some of which will be in the May issue of the Labor Notes magazine. If you don't already get the magazine, you can subscribe for just $30 a year. We pack each issue with reporting on rank-and-file workers' campaigns and tactics, viewpoints and analyses on issues that workers are organizing around, and tried and tested organizing advice from people who've put it to use.
And if you subscribe by May 13th, you'll start getting the magazine from the June issue onward. In the meantime, stick around for a bit of a preview into some of what we have coming in the May issue. We've got Natasha's piece on the Mexican General Motors workers in Silao, Guanajuato, who won record raises despite the company's scaremongering about tariff threats. Natasha, can you tell us about how this came about and why this is such a big deal?
Yeah, so these workers were going into a salary revision process right in the midst of Trump's tariff threats. It would have been really easy in the face of this incredible uncertainty to settle for less, let the company weaponize this uncertainty because it really is such a chaotic time. But these workers and the negotiating committee didn't let themselves be scared into submission. They walked out of there with double-digit raises, putting them at the top edge of Mexico's auto industry and raising standards for other workplaces too. For some context, these workers build the Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra pickup at the Silao plant, and they're members of the independent Cintia, the National Autoworkers Union. This is a union that has only emerged in recent years, and it's really an incredible story, but we'll get into that in a bit. So, there's a very good reason that the negotiating committee didn't let themselves get intimidated. They came armed with information. Alberto, a maintenance worker who works on the facility's robots and other technical issues to prevent assembly line outages, said that they came prepared with numbers on inflation, the plant's productivity and profits, the poverty threshold, and family living wage calculations.
Right, so instead of letting the company distract them with something that's dominating headlines, Trump's tariffs, which, by the way, we still don't really know even where they're going to land, the workers redirected each other towards something more concrete for them.
Exactly. Just for context, back in February, Trump declared 25% tariffs on goods imported to the US from Mexico and Canada. But there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how this all plays out. Trump and Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, have been working to reach an agreement, but failing that, we could see Mexico enact retaliatory tariffs, as Canada has done. As a result, there's been a lot of uncertainty in the auto industry in all three countries. Stellantis has idled facilities in Canada and Mexico, and temporarily laid off 900 U.S. auto workers who supply those factories with engines and other parts. Mercedes-Benz has said it could pull some of its less expensive models from the U.S. market, and GM said it could shift some production from Mexico to the U.S., but hasn't made any firm commitments. Workers knew, though, that regardless of the uncertainty, they had enough leverage to make real demands. This is how Alberto put it. It'd be like if I told you, I can't build here because tomorrow there could be a meteorite storm and it'll topple my construction. Yeah, that could happen, but it could also not, he said. We went in with a solid, well-conceived strategy with hard data, and as a result, he said, we were able to pressure the company.
That sounds pretty clear-headed, and just as impressive is what they won, including an average of 10% wage increases. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so the salary increase substantially raised their standards of living and the bar for auto workers in Mexico. They have a new wage scale now that puts 2/3 of their workforce above Mexico's family poverty line and well above Mexico's minimum wage of about $1.71 per hour. They've eliminated the lowest tier, so the plant's starting wage is up by 33.95% to about $3 an hour. Most other workers will get between a 9 and 10.25% raise. And something that's pretty incredible, they're even forcing pro-boss, basically company unions, to wake up and deliver for workers. GM workers at another facility in Coahuila are represented by the CTM, which exists really just to stave off a real union, like negotiating pathetic wages, really just an institution that serves the boss. And days after Cintia's announcement, workers at this Coahuila facility won a 10.8% raise, in what one of Cintia's advisors, Dr. Willebaldo Gomez Supa, characterized as a transparent effort to stave off a challenge from Cintia. Past raises at the facility in recent years were 3, 4, maybe 5%, and even though their contract had expired February 1st, the announcement came right on the heels of Cintia's own announcement, signaling that they waited to hear what those workers won to match it. Another thing I find absolutely incredible is that if Cynthia members keep up this double-digit winning streak, they could approach parity with some non-union US auto workers within a decade. In 9 years, the highest earning workers could reach $16 an hour. Now, when you consider the wage differentials between the US and Mexico, that is really just astonishing. And it speaks to something really important, that the best way to bridge the wage gap is to support militant organizing efforts like Cynthia's. Their fight is to the benefit of workers everywhere.
That's a really hopeful trend. It also reminds me of something you highlighted in your coverage back in January of the USMCA and the free trade agreements we've had over the past 30 years about how they've only pitted workers in the US against their counterparts in Mexico. Because there's this narrative that NAFTA and its successor agreements have somehow benefited workers in Mexico at the expense of workers in the US. But the fact that these auto workers in Silao still had to fight to win even a $3 an hour starting wage really puts that in perspective.
I think that's exactly right. Average wages for Mexican auto workers were cut in half between 1994, when the North American Free Trade Agreement went into effect, and 2016. US auto workers' wages dropped too, of course, and they've lost hundreds of thousands of auto jobs here since NAFTA. The only winners of the Free Trade Agreement were the bosses.
Let's go back to what you were saying earlier about how these workers in Silao joined Cynthia. They'd voted to organize with Cynthia back in 2022, right? How did that happen?
Yeah, at the time, they'd pushed out this boss friendly union I mentioned earlier, the Confederation of Mexican Workers, or CTM. It was a big deal to try and bring in an independent union to break the quote unquote stranglehold of the employer friendly unions that have long dominated Mexico's labor scene, as our Labor Notes co-workers Luis Felipe Leon and Dan DiMaggio put it at the time in their coverage of the vote in early 2022. At the time, they reported that the plant's 6,500 workers had voted just months earlier to invalidate the contract bargained by a corrupt local of the CTM, which ended its right to represent the workers there. These workers faced down an incredible intimidation campaign. They were told if they didn't vote in the CTM's garbage contract, they'd lose their jobs. The company fired multiple Cynthia organizers under absurd pretexts, and the union's leader, Alejandra Morales, was threatened outside her home by 3 people in a pickup truck with the license plates removed. But these workers faced down these threats, and they won in a landslide. Of the 88% of workers who voted, 78% said yes.
That's incredible. And it seems like they won their new contract not long after.
Yeah, they won their first contract in May of 2022 with an 8.5% wage hike and better benefits, as former Labor Notes intern Alejandra Quintero reported at the time. Alejandra, by the way, now runs the popular Instagram and TikTok accounts All Things Labor, where she talks workers' rights and organizing strategy, so definitely check those out. But yeah, the benefits these workers won at the time also included a much better quarterly production bonus, which increased from about $25 to $80, and they got a 14% increase in pantry vouchers and got Christmas Eve off. Their contract also addressed grueling working conditions and harassment on the job, and directed the company to negotiate with the union on work schedules and to set some policies around addressing sexual harassment.
I really appreciated Alberto's points about winning workers' trust by building a new union culture. Alberto, that maintenance worker in the Silao facility, observed that the CTM's favorite line when a worker would ask for support was, "Why are you complaining? Be grateful you have work." That's probably all too familiar to many of us. It's kind of a bummer that crappy organizing apparently transcends borders, but it's great to see another example of how, when your union breaks your heart, you can fight to improve it, or replace it with a union that won't. I also laughed at his line that some workers think, well, everyone steals, but hopefully you guys steal less. It's heartening to see that even workers who weren't so sure Cynthia would be different are coming around when they see that the union is serious about transparency, that it's not here to be friendly with the boss, but to organize and deliver for workers. Another piece we're looking forward to seeing in the May issue is by our coworker Barbara Mataloni, who has some ideas for how unions should be bringing members together urgently in this moment where the Trump administration is engaging in a multi-front attack on workers and our communities.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get her take. Can you give us a little sneak peek?
Well, she pulls directly from her experience as president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association and talks about how they fended off attacks by what she describes as a group of, quote, Wall Street billionaires, right wing zealots, and Democratic wolves in sheep's clothing who were signing off on abusive testing regimes, canned curriculum, privatization via charter schools, and state takeovers of elected school boards, end quote. They held 37 regional gatherings over a period of about 5 months across 2014 and 2015. She said, quote, these were gatherings, not meetings, not a place to make motions or vote on what we should do, not yet. Instead, we broke into groups to talk about what we cared about in our work and what we wanted to change. Barbara also writes that approach can and needs to be scaled up to meet this moment of crisis. She suggests that national and international unions should initiate a blitz of member planning, starting by coming up with some discussion questions and holding meetings regionally and locally and growing the gatherings as more people get involved. We'll have Barbara on the podcast next week to talk more about it.
Can't wait. That's our show for today. Again, to get the Labor Notes magazine from the June issue onward, subscribe by May 13th. It's $30 a year, but if you sign up for a paid registration to any of our upcoming events, you can choose to tack on a Labor Notes magazine subscription for half its usual price, so just $15 a year.
Speaking of events, we have a 2-part series on building a strong contract campaign starting next week. It'll be on 2 Wednesdays, April 30th and May 7th. And we'll have our next session of What to Do When the Union Breaks Your Heart on Tuesday, May 6th. You can sign up at labornotes.org/events, where you can also check out some of our in-person events coming up in Colorado Springs, Portland, Oregon, New Orleans, and the Bay Area.
Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, please download our episode. The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Danielle Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by Labor Notes Labor Climate Organizer, Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.